Hello, everyone. We'll get started shortly. I'm just going to let people kind of jump in here and then we'll get right into it. Okay, well, I know a couple people are still joining, but we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Crystal Shaughnessy. I am the event specialist here at EDB, and I will be your host today for our webinar. I am joined by Julian Moffett. Julian is EDB's Chief Technology Officer of Financial Services, and he'll be our speaker today for why Postgres is becoming the standard in financial services. Before we kind of jump into it and I turn it over to Julian, I'd like to just review a couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, the presentation is being recorded, and we will be sharing both the recording and the slides with you after the broadcast, so please keep an eye out for that email from our team. And secondly, please note that the lines are currently muted. We do expect the presentation to last most of the time today. However, we will be taking some questions along the way as we move through the material. So please, if you do have a question, throw those into the Q&A box. I will do my very best work in monitoring the chat for any questions that are floating around, but we will give priority to any questions in the Q&A box. That being said, if there are any outstanding questions at the end and we have any extra time to allot to those, we will certainly do so. With that, I'll hand it off to Julian to kick us off.
Thanks, Crystal. Much appreciated. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Welcome. Thank you all very much for taking the time. I'm really looking forward to the session. Postgres is a little bit of a passion of mine. Open source is a passion of mine. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some of that with you guys. So just a couple of things that we'll walk through. So I'll give you a little bit more of an introduction on me, tell you a little bit more about where I've come from, some of my experience. I want to talk a little bit about just the rise of open source software and Postgres as a whole. Then I want to talk a little bit about just some of the challenges of running mission critical applications on open source software. And then finally, we'll spend a little bit of time on how we, EDB, can help you kind of accelerate that Postgres journey, how we can help you be successful, how we can help you scale up your environments to be able to run those kind of top tier mission critical applications. So without further ado, the first thing we're going to do is ask you to do a little bit of multitasking. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on me, but just while we do that, what I'd like to do is just pull up a very, very brief poll for you guys, just to get a sense on where folks are in their Postgres journey. So you should see that come up on your screens right now. 5 answers, don't overthink it, keep it really simple. We're just trying to get a sense on where folks are, whether they're just kind of looking at Postgres right now, just evaluation only, whether you're running in dev, whether you're running in dev and prod, but just for low priority applications, all the way through to running dev and prod and mission critical applications. And I will say anybody that answers positively on that last question can then take over the presentation for the remainder of the session. But if you guys would be so kind, please populate that and we'll come back to the result very shortly. We'll leave the poll open for a little while and we will then come back and just see where we all are eventually. Cool. So a little bit about me, just for some context, a little bit of background. So I joined EDB just at the start of this year, so relatively new. Prior to that, I worked in financial services for a long, long time, for almost 17 years. I used to work for a company called UBS, which for those of you who are not familiar is a global wealth manager, global investment bank. I've always worked in technology, done a whole bunch of different roles, both in infrastructure organization, in the business application delivery organizations, in our CTO function. But I think probably most relevant for you guys, most relevant for the audience is some of the work I've done specifically in the database space. So 3 things primarily. Together with my team, we set the strategy in my previous company around open source databases, and more specifically, we positioned Postgres as our go-to relational database of choice. Secondly, we did such a good job on that the then head of infrastructure asked me to go and build out our private cloud and public cloud offerings on open source Postgres. So I had the pleasure of falling into lots of traps and making lots of mistakes along that journey. And then finally, once we'd set the strategy and built out the target platforms, I was responsible for running the program to basically increase the adoption of the new platforms we built, or more specifically in our case, push people off the incumbent vendor. So like I say, lots of experience in this space. kind of been there, done it. Definitely got the t-shirt, almost certainly got some scars on my back. And that's one of the things, I learned a lot of things along the way. One of the reasons I wanted to join EDB was to take some of those learnings and be able to share those on a slightly broader scale. So really looking forward to kind of walking through that with you guys today. And yeah, so let's have a quick look at the poll if we can. Crystal, if you're able to pull up the results there.
Sure. All right, so I'll share those with you. Interesting that nobody chose running in DV only.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. So good, we've got a fairly good spread across the audience, so that's good. Brilliant, good, thank you. That's really helpful, folks. Appreciate you taking a few seconds to do that. It just gives me a sense of where we are, and we can kind of orientate the conversation accordingly. Cool, all right, so let me move forward to the main part of the presentation. So just for a little bit of context, so financial services, you guys obviously working in the industry, it's sometimes hard. There's a significant volume of change. There always has been in financial services. What we want to do, just kind of walk through why there's so much change, what's driving change currently, what does that typically result in, what kind of initiatives do we see our customers running, and what does that ultimately mean for technology teams, both for infrastructure teams and for application development teams. So just going from left to right, so from a driver's perspective, we've captured a few. We've captured 5 primary ones here. There are many kind of macro trends that we see across the financial services industry. These ones we definitely see repeatedly with our customers. I've added some links at the bottom. You'll find a lot of these are echoed with some of the key analysts. So we've got some Forrester sub stuff, McKinsey, Gartner, and ADC down there. But I think the big one, the big overriding driver for change is to remain competitive. And it sounds obvious, but it's absolutely critical. The space itself, even with established financial services players, is highly competitive. But I think what we've all seen over the last few years is just the rise of the fintechs. And more importantly, the rise of people from a non-financial arena, so with people like Apple, Amazon, Google, all of these kind of guys coming in and really challenging the traditional financial services players. So that's been that's a bit of a shakeup, and it's caused the CIOs who are doing really well to kind of really rethink how they can be more innovative, how they can increase their reputation in the market, and ultimately how they attract talent. So the CIOs that are kind of winning at this are the folks that are understand that they need to be able to attract talent, they need to be able to innovate, they need bright people to come in and help them kind of get to the next level, to get back on par with some of the new upstarts, if you like. They are also very, very clear that they need to improve agility. So agility in this context means time to market, getting building blocks in developers' hands faster so that your developers can focus on building the business logic to help enable your business capabilities to ultimately make your company successful. I think the traditional financial services companies don't have a great track record of being terribly fast to market. And again, back to the competitive landscape today, the fintechs are much, much faster, they're much more nimble, much faster kind of delivery to production. So the big players, the big kind of traditional players are now having to play catch up a little bit there, which is why we see a lot of move to kind of address that. The fourth item we've called out here is where new technologies come along and it opens up new markets for the big financial services players. I'm going to call out one that's been around for a while. I think the rise of data science and the use of artificial intelligence in kind of monetizing the mountains of data that the big financial services institutions are sitting on is really key. That's one that we see a lot. Many of our customers are either already have data science organizations or are spinning those up as we speak. And the last item we called out is not terribly sexy. It's one of those things that's been around for a long time. Anyone that's been in financial services for a long time will remember back in 2008 and the crash and some of the cost activities that happened as a result of that. I don't think we're quite at that level today, but what has happened since then is that cost discipline has remained really key for financial services institutions. The margins are so fine, it's critical that big companies in technology and obviously across their operating costs generally manage those costs very, very tightly. So what does all that mean? In terms of initiatives, I've picked out a few, and hopefully some of these items will resonate with you guys. Application modernization, that's a big one. We see a lot of that across our customer base. Process digitalization. Digitalization gets a bad rap. It's one of those kind of bingo buzzwords that people brand all kinds of activities on. I think the essence of it is absolutely right. It's about systematically implementing process. It's about introducing things like AI in incident management for triage and potential automated remediation. So the essence of digitalization is exactly the right place to be. We see people moving to agile, so more from an operating model perspective, less technically, though clearly there's an impact on how we deliver technology. We see a lot of reskilling of staff. Simplification and risk remediation, those are two activities we still see a lot of. They're not new. They've been around for a long time in big financial services companies. Simplification, typically the big financial players are the result of mergers and acquisitions that have happened over a number of years. So often you find you've got some duplication in applications. You almost certainly have duplication in products. We see it all the time with our customers where they have every flavor of database platform under the sun, and they're now getting to a point where that's unmanageable, and they want to some help to reduce the complexity there. End of life and risk remediation. I think historically the financial services companies haven't had a great track record of managing the life cycle of some of their infrastructure components. And I think there's a number of very good reasons for that. I think some of the regulatory pressures and the volume of work that ensues from that is huge, and that takes priority, as does just the clear business imperatives of remaining competitive. And what often happens is that things like lifecycle management gets a little bit deprioritized, and then ultimately gets to a point where it's a little painful. You're either paying a lot of money for extended support, or you get to the point where you're potentially running out of support completely. So it's an interesting one. We see a lot of customers who are kind of looking at application modernization, sitting on a great big tail of end of life, and looking to introduce new technologies such as Postgres. And we see people bringing those two things together. So solving their end of life problem at the same time as modernizing and introducing new technology. The last one I've added just in the middle column in terms of initiatives, seen these more recently, a lot of data center downsizing and consolidation. So I think cost is definitely one of the drivers for this. Bricks and mortar buildings are expensive to run. Just the simple, the basic operation of running your own on-premise data center and the CapEx involved in hardware, procurement, storage, all that kind of stuff, the practices you need around kind of maintaining some kind of rolling forecast, making sure you've got capacity at the right time. There is nothing worse for application dev teams who want to go full steam ahead in the spirit of Agile, to be told that they've got to wait 3 months while we go and procure some hardware. So all of that's really hard. So we see a lot of our customers trying to move some of their workloads at least to public cloud, and that gives them an opportunity to potentially downsize their data centers. Moving to public cloud, moving entire workloads and entire application estates to public clouds is probably not an option for everyone, honestly, which is why people still need to keep some kind of on-premise presence. So what we see there, which is interesting, and there's a driver here which I didn't capture on the left-hand side, for environmental and social governance, ESG, you may have heard of that one. We see the E part of that, environmental, is fundamentally about reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So we see a lot of folks trying to renovate, to modernize, or move to new kind of more sustainable, more green data centers with more efficient heating and cooling options, with renewable energy sources, all those types of things. So really interesting stuff. Hopefully we'll do a complete webinar on the ESG topic. I think it merits one of those in its own right. That's a really going to be a huge topic in this space going forward. But yeah, just on the right hand side, what does all of this mean? So we've got a whole bunch of drivers that are driving, that are causing us to want to make change. We've got a bunch of initiatives that have spun up as a result. What does it mean? So cloud, as we said, we see a lot of people wanting to adopt clouds. I think the cloud topic could probably merit a webinar on its own right as well. I think the drivers for cloud are certainly cost is one, or the promise of cost reduction, the promise of elasticity and scalability is really exciting from an infrastructure perspective. I think also from an application perspective, the ability to be able to access technologies that otherwise might take a long time to implement on premise is a really big deal for application development teams. So very attractive proposition in cloud. Again, not everyone can put their entire workloads in cloud, particularly in financial services. We know that we're dealing with a lot of very sensitive data. We've got a lot of regulatory obligations, and in some cases, we're not allowed to put data into public cloud providers. So what we've seen there is that application development teams are very, very fond of that cloud operating model. So the ability to kind of point and click and get a database 10 minutes later is very appealing and really dramatically improve the time to market for our developers. That's fundamentally our goal here. Our goal here is to try and help out, give our developers the tools to be able to do their job faster, to be more productive faster, so that, again, they can build the business logic, enable those business capabilities, and help your organizations be more successful. So we're seeing that as a service model being replicated on-premise, and we do a lot of work with our customers to try and help people design what that service model should look like, help them with the automation and the provisioning behind that, and some of the full end-to-end service capabilities that people need there. As a result of cloud and as a service, I think we see, from an operating model perspective, we see some staff reskilling. So again, kind of on that theme of not wanting to lose talent retention, I think there's an enormous amount of institutional knowledge within the employees of financial services companies. People don't want to lose those staff or that knowledge. So it's really important that you reskill your guys, really important that you look at opportunities around DevOps, the whole kind of CI/CD pipeline. I think people's skill sets shift. It's gone are the days of kind of teams of folk downloading packages of database platforms and building their own shell and Perl scripts. I've still got some Perl scripts out there in the ether, so God knows how horrifically awful they are to read these days. But gone are those days of people trying to hand crank all of that stuff themselves. And I think people are looking more at kind of infrastructure as code type options. So it's a shift in skill set. SRE is the other one. Site reliability engineering from an operations perspective is another kind of shift of kind of classic operations to a more to a new model. But the big one that we see time and time again is application refactoring. And that can be many things. So obviously we're looking to kind of modernize the application stack. Sometimes we want to introduce new technologies. Sometimes we want to remove business logic from the database and move it up into the app tier. Sometimes we want to take apart our great big monolithic applications. So everyone's got them. We've all had those horrible, big, scary applications that are so brittle it takes 6 months to do a release, and everyone's on tenterhooks whenever you get to that release window. So we see a lot of folks trying to break those apart, make them into smaller, kind of more modular, more manageable increments. I think microservices is the extreme for that. I wouldn't say microservices is right for everyone, but we definitely see that an increase in modularity for those big applications. And with all of that, what's happening, or what we see happening is when the application teams are kind of looking at the technology stack top to bottom, they're introducing new functionality. They may be consolidating applications. They may be wanting to move logic elsewhere. As I say, when you're touching the app stack at that extent, then what we also see is people wanting to actually look at trying to break that bond with some of the proprietary database vendors that they've had for a long time. So the big players, we all know them. They've had something of a vice-like grip on our estates for quite some time. So this is the opportunity to do it. And then that's where we see Postgres and open source technologies as a whole coming into the mix for a number of really, really good reasons. So let me pause there and see if there's any questions, and then I'll move forward to the next slide.
It does look like there is one question, Julian. How does Postgres fit into ODS type offerings in public cloud?
Right, we'll come to that later. So long story short, we do have a public cloud offering ourselves, which is called Big Animal, and that now operates in both Microsoft Azure and in AWS. It's our own proprietary offering, gives you portability between cloud providers. So we can talk a little bit more about that in detail. And thank you for the question. The question is great. We'll try and answer them as we go. What we'll do is we'll keep a log, as Crystal says, we'll keep a log of the questions and try and give you some more verbose answers as we send out the follow-up to the session. Good. Okay, so again, what we're seeing is open source very much becoming mainstream. Postgres very much emerging as the leader in the database space. I put a couple of links in there. It's very easy just to kind of open up a browser. You can find a multitude of articles describing just the growth of open source software over the last few years. What we thought was very interesting was on the bottom left, we're kind of at this tipping point. This is data from IDC. We're at a tipping point where the use of open source database technologies is now outstripping the more traditional proprietary vendor offerings, which I think is kind of key. And as a result, and something we're very pleased about in EDB, is that Postgres is consistently very, very popular. So if you have a look at Cloud Native Computing Foundation, so CNCF or Stack Overflow or other developer communities, Postgres always comes out in the kind of top 3 of most used, most loved, most wanted, largest developer community. And it's also the fastest growing database, which is something we're very, very, very pleased about. And not without good reason. I mean, Postgres has been around for a long time. Postgres is a very solid database. I think certainly in the last few releases, I'd probably say from about 9 or 10 onwards, there's some functionally, it's absolutely up there with some of the more traditional players that folks would recognize in the space. And I think that's been recognized also in some of the accolades it's received. So if you have a look on the page there from dbengines.com, Postgres actually has been voted DBMS of the Year 3 times in the last 5 years, which I think is pretty impressive. Not only is it impressive because it's 3 times in the last 5 years, but I'm not aware that any other DBMS has been voted that the best DBMS 3 times at all. So yeah, good stuff for Postgres. Again, we're very, very pleased about that. Why is that? I think cost is certainly a factor. Clearly, the big vendors have had, like I say, something of a vice-like grip on all of us for some time, which meant they could impose commercial terms we weren't necessarily too excited about. So cost is a big deal. The differential between a proprietary vendor offering and an open source plus a support provider is fairly significant. But flexibility, I think, is one of the big drivers. So certainly in my previous role, one of the things when we looked at open source software and we looked at the open source database market, one of the massive drivers for us was portability. What's really cool about Postgres as an example is I can use open source Postgres database and I can go to a provider because I want 24/7, 365 support. I value my sleep, so I need that. And I can go into a commercial agreement with someone on that. And 12 months later, if I'm not happy with the level of support or I'm not comfortable with the commercial terms, I can shop around and I can basically, almost in a paper exercise, I can look for a better option. And the big difference is I don't need to do a massive technical migration. I don't need to impact hundreds or thousands of applications. I don't need people to do database code transcoding. I don't need to do regression testing. I don't need the huge developer effort that comes with that. So that's a massive plus for open source technology. The portability is critical. The other thing we're finding is that I think historically there's been a perception that Postgres was just for dev, it was just for playing around in the development environment. We are absolutely not seeing that now. We're seeing Postgres running in production environments at scale, and I'll show you some of that right now. So particularly in financial services, yeah, I think there's an article I've added at the top. There's a couple of links. Again, we're going to send you all this afterwards from FinExtra, and they kind of coined it pretty aptly, where I think financial services institutions have been keeping open source software, or historically were keeping open source software at arm's length. And the big news is that's changed. That's quite dramatically changed. So I just captured some of that article, which is kind of couple of key indicators there. So you see some fairly significant acquisitions of open source companies by more mainstream tech providers. We see the big tech players themselves adopting and very publicly adopting an open source strategy. So Microsoft's a big proponent of that. On bottom left, what we've seen is the emergence of FINOS. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with FINOS, but the acronym doesn't quite match the description. So that's the FinTech Open Source Foundation, which is fundamentally a community of some pretty heavyweight players in the industry whose goal is to deliver open source software solutions for financial services. So I've listed some of the names there. There's many more on the FINOS site. You'll see some of the big supporters, but as I say, pretty much heavyweights. I picked out three, or I've added three additional links in there just because I thought they were interesting. So Goldman Sachs is a big proponent. They have developed a data management, data governance solution and have open sourced via FINOS a significant number of modules of that solution. Capital One I called out because they very publicly stated that they are open source first. And similarly, Deutsche, same thing. They've got a statement, I'm paraphrasing, but they kind of made the statement along the lines of, yeah, we want to be number one in open source in our sector. So lots and lots of support for open source, which is a change within the financial services industry. And just on the right-hand side of the page, we are seeing exactly the same in EDB. So top right on that page, we've got a kind of pseudo capability model, which kind of describes the banking, financial services and insurance sector from an EDB perspective. So we've kind of broken that down into the three main sectors you see in the various subsectors within that. And the little orange dots basically give you an indication of where we have customers. So as you can see, we've almost got coverage right across the map. And I've called out just three of our customers just because I think it's interesting to hear some of these names. So ABN AMRO Clearing is a huge deal in derivatives and equity clearing. They run on Postgres and we support them. MasterCard, I think, needs no introduction. We've been working with MasterCard for a long time, specifically supporting their disaster recovery for one of their primary payment gateways. ACA, you may not be familiar with the name. They are a global payment solution processing company. Some of the numbers and just dollar amounts that go through their systems on a daily basis are eye-watering. We support them with Postgres. We also support them with a product that we've got called BDR, which is bidirectional replication. So that's effectively a multi-master solution to give them near zero downtime, high availability, and more importantly, across regions. They're a very global footprint. So as you can see, a lot of support for open source generally in the financial services space. We are certainly seeing it in our customer base. And yeah, that's something we're very happy about. And it's something that we want to continue. It's something we want to try and accelerate other folks on that same journey. So just going back to the poll, so there was a kind of a spread of folks who were in different places in terms of the journey. And I think in financial services, there's a very, very good reason for that. And the simple reason is it's hard. It's not easy to really deliver financial services applications at enterprise scale. I always look at this from kind of four lenses. You've got the reliability, scalability, performance, and security. We'll come back to the control requirements shortly, but these things are critical. If you're going to operate at scale, if you're going to operate with mission critical applications, you need reliability. You're going to need uptime. You're going to need high availability solutions, disaster recovery solutions on your databases. You've got to have probably a variety of different RTOs and RPOs that you're going to have to try and address. You're probably going to have to introduce different levels of tiering for that. We're seeing a lot more customers who want to support application tiers with zero downtime. And that doesn't mean just in the context of some kind of storage or compute or network failure. It's actually to be able to do patching. So as an example, with our BDR solution, you can basically minor version patch and major version patch your Postgres database without dropping your application. So those kind of things are very, very important for folks that need to run, again, with that zero downtime requirements. And most folks in financial services, typically large global players, are running applications that span availability zones or data centers, and often, as an example, in the case of ACI, cross-region as well. So all of that's not easy to implement. You need some help to do that. Performance is the same thing. You're typically going to have across your application estate, going to have a range of different applications. At some extremes, you're going to have very high TPS, transaction per second requirements. It's really, really important to size the compute appropriately to be able to meet those requirements. Scalability, I can't talk enough about this one. This is critical. If you're running a database estate in the hundreds or in the thousands, you are absolutely going to require some orchestration and provisioning. You're going to require some automation behind that. You need the repeatability, you need the reliability in that deployment. Managing configuration drift is a nightmare. Nobody wants to be in the situation where an application goes to production and fails miserably, and you find out it's because the database's configuration is different because someone hand cranked it in prod versus in UAT. That's just not where we need to be. And it's also a huge suck on time. So really important to get that orchestration and automation in place to be able to manage database volumes at scale. Equally so, monitoring is a really big deal. You need to have visibility in your estates. Just take something like Log4j. I can imagine some folks on this call were probably scrambling towards the end of last year, trying to understand what patch levels their software was at across your enterprises. You need tools to be able to tell you that information quickly. Ideally, you need tools to be able to then remotely perform actions on your database estate. Again, if you're operating in the hundreds and thousands, doing that manually is a massive undertaking. So getting kind of real enterprise level tooling to help you with that is critically important. And then the obvious one in the financial services space, security. We deal with some very, very sensitive information, whether it's client information for ultra high net worth individuals, or it's my PCI data, my payment card information. That data must be protected. We're all under some fairly serious obligations from ultimately from regulatory bodies to make sure that data is protected appropriately. So we see lots of requirements around encryption in transit, encryption at rest, redaction specifically in the context of PCI. We see a lot of customers with requirements around kind of granular access control, role-based access control, making sure that that data is appropriately protected. Just on the right-hand side, this is the stuff, all of these things, everything on this page takes a long, long time to implement. I've built Postgres environments in the past, and there's always a kind of the same theme. So you can get the database running probably in a day. Even I can do that. I can download the database and get a database up and running. You can probably get your development environment up and running with full automation in, I don't know, 1 to 2 months maximum. What I find is meeting all of these enterprise level requirements takes a significant amount of time. It's a significant investment. So some of the things we've captured on the right-hand side, I've called them control requirements. There's a link at the bottom. Again, for the big players, you'll find most folks operate in multi-jurisdictions. There's multiple regulators involved, whether it's the SEC in the US, FCA, various other regulators globally. We'll find frequently that people kind of develop their own internal control framework, which is the reflection of those regulatory obligations. So I've captured a few of them here. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but some of the ones that I think are particularly relevant in the database space. So just taking the first one, I'll pick a couple of examples on here. So we see a lot of customers with requirements around strong authentication, two-factor authentication requirements. We see a lot of customers with authorization requirements, as we touched on earlier. So making sure that you're meeting your join, remove, reliever obligations is critical. So having central identity management, central entitlement management is a big deal. You don't want to have a situation where I leave a company and there's an orphaned database there's an orphaned database account sitting around that someone could potentially exploit at a later date. Or equally, if I move departments, you want to make sure that my privileges are revoked or upgraded or downgraded as appropriate. So lots and lots of requirements in that space that take some time to implement. A couple of the other security vulnerability testing is a big deal. Patch management is critical. Obviously, again, if you're operating at scale, you really, really need that orchestration to be able to do that quickly and reliably. Compliance monitoring, we see a lot of, again, in the financial services space. So typically things like additional monitoring on like failed login attempts, that type of thing on the database. So long story short, there's a world of complex requirements, and it's not just for databases, it's for any software, frankly, that you implement for financial services at an enterprise grade. So anything where you're trying to get up to high tier application availability, then there's a lot of boxes to tick to be comfortable that you can actually design, operate, and maintain those applications and those databases appropriately. I'm going to pause there for a second. I think there's a question in the chat.
Yes, there is. The question is, what are the maximum realistic capacity metrics, like transactions or total size that you're seeing?
You're going to hate this answer. It depends. So long story short, that's something we would work with you guys on in quite some detail. And actually, I'll come to that very shortly. My experience of Postgres is it's all about the available compute and storage capacity that you can throw at your database. The Postgres database itself obviously sits on top of a compute stack, and if you size that compute stack appropriately, then you're going to get the right results and the right throughput, the right transactions per second. We've got some benchmarking materials that we've done. So Crystal, let's make a note on that, and perhaps we can send those out after the call, and we'll include this in the follow-up.
Okay.
But so just against that backdrop, so it's a really good question. So you're trying to get to enterprise grade Postgres. You're trying to scale up your existing implementation, or maybe you're just starting. You've got a multitude of questions. You've got a multitude of things you need to try and figure out and work out. How the hell do I do this? How do I manage hundreds of databases, thousands of databases? Where do I find expertise? What are the best practices? Do I need 5 nines availability? What even is 5 nines? Do I need a hybrid cloud strategy? What is my cloud strategy? Where do I even start in this thing? Are there particular applications I should go for? All of those things are the types of questions folks need to answer. And these are the kind of things that we love to try and help our customers with. So I think one of the things about EDB, and I'm very biased on this, obviously, is I think we're a little different than some of our peers. We like to look at your whole solution. We like to look at some of those questions. The database solution for me is way more than just downloading the database. Even, like I say, even I can do that. I can download the Postgres binaries, I can spin up a schema, and I can populate some data, but that's not a database solution. So the database solution, and again, going back to that as a service discussion we had earlier, people look for a complete front-to-back solution in database these days. So that means everything from how do I order one of these things? How do I request one of these things? Application teams have got very, very familiar with pointing and clicking and expecting to get a database 10 minutes later. So you need some kind of entry point. You might be wanting to offer self-service options. You might want to expose APIs or Ansible scripts, Terraform scripts, whatever it happens to be. You're going to need some automation and provisioning capability behind that. So we like to help develop that with you. We've got a whole bunch of tools ourselves to try and help do that. What we also really want to do is look at your deployment patterns. So we probably want to help you across your estate. So on the basis you're probably running, again, hundreds of thousands of database, you're going to have a range of different applications. They're going to have different requirements from a performance perspective. You're probably going to have different requirements around availability, different RTOs, RPOs. So what we try to do is we definitely don't want folks at one extreme to be kind of building databases ad hoc or bespoke for every application. I think long gone are the days of people building application environments in a bespoke fashion. Nor do we want you to be building databases with a kind of one size fits all. I think neither of those are good. At one end, the overhead is enormous, and at the other end, you're probably going to be massively over provisioning resources. So what we try to do is kind of boil down the requirements on, like I say, performance and availability, break those down into different tiers of offering, typically 2 to 3, 4, probably maximum. And then within those, give folks the ability, and those offerings typically are your deployment patterns. So whether it's a highly available cluster, or it's a single node implementation, or it's a cross-regional implementation, we'll design a pattern to help you with that. And then within that, we can give you options. We can give your developers an option to pick a compute stack. So you can say, I don't know, something simple like a small, medium, and large compute implementation. So gives folks a little bit of flexibility. There's always going to be exceptions to that. The big challenge is if you've got more exceptions than you're your standard categories, then you've got something wrong and you need to revisit those categories. The other thing that we really like to do is, again, to the point that to the question earlier, we need to understand your performance requirements so that we can help advise on compute and storage. We need to, I can give you the most beautiful database in the world, I can give you the best provisioning mechanism in the world, we can get your provisioning time down to super fast, and it's kind of like giving you the Ferrari, but if you're going to run it on a dirt track, you're probably not going to get the performance that you like. So we want to work with you very closely there just to understand what the requirement is there. Beyond the pure technical spec int requirements, what we typically look at is just organizationally, where are you? So one of our offerings that we're very keen on currently is a cloud native Postgres operator that we've just released. That runs on top of the Kubernetes platform, obviously, and it takes away a lot of the administrative overhead in terms of deployment. It makes some of the, it offloads a lot of that to the Kubernetes platform itself. But if I was at a customer site and I was working with you and we didn't think you had enough maturity in Kubernetes, that's not something we would necessarily propose. So we can support a whole bunch of different options. We deploy on bare metal, we deploy on traditional hypervisor environments, we deploy on Kubernetes environments, and we can do both of those in on-premise or in public cloud as well. The next one on the list is also interesting, and it's one that strangely always gets or often gets overlooked. So this is about, I've built the shiny database. I've given you this super fast provisioning time. I've given you the shiniest, most beautiful database in the world. It's kind of like giving you a car, but not giving you the keys to get into it. So if you can't provision application accounts, give them the appropriate entitlements, then you've failed. So, and I've done this, I've made this mistake myself where we were very pleased with ourselves. We delivered the database and we were like, yep, you're on your own now, app team. And all of the good work we'd done in delivering them, getting their provisioning time down to like 10 minutes was ruined because it took them another 3 days to go and provision user accounts and get them integrated with, in our case, LDAP, get them integrated with the entitlement system. So that's something you need to build into the solution as well. Got to think of this as a full solution for your consumers, who obviously are your application development teams. Backup monitoring goes without saying. Day-to-day operations, I'll just spend a little time on that one. That's really critical. And again, one that I didn't appreciate the significance of perhaps in the past. Again, you can build the shiniest, most beautiful database platform in the world. You can help people use the platform, deploy their DDL or DML changes. But when things go bang in the night, you need people who are able to respond and able to respond very quickly and address it. If you haven't trained your operations guys, the chances are when something goes wrong in your storage stack, and your compute stack, or in your network, your ops guys, if they don't know the runbooks to do a failover, you've just elongated the outage time for your application, which gives you, if you're starting a new service, can give you a really bad reputation. So really, really critical that you train your guys. From an EDB perspective, we offer training. We also offer a service called Remote DBA, which is where effectively we put our guys into your organization to operate the databases for you. Patching and upgrades are also critical. I think we all collectively need to get to a place where we're more proactively managing the life cycle of our technology components. So that's something we'd want to try and develop with you. And again, there's bunches of tools that we can offer there to try and help with that. And in that whole thing, what we like to do is take a really, really simple kind of plan, build, and run approach. So planning is where we spend some time with you guys, understanding the requirements, understanding some of the constraints, understanding some of the system integrations we need to do. We'll deliver the kind of solution designs, and then we move into build, which is exactly what it says it is. We'll work with your teams to help build. And run is that piece that I just mentioned in terms of transitioning to your operations teams, making sure folks are appropriately trained, or helping you run that directly. So yeah, I think we've got, I'm very happy. Again, I'm a little biased, but I think we've got a very good approach on how we look at that. This is a little bit of a marketing slide, I apologize, but just to give you a flavor of what we've got. We've got kind of 3 primary things: software and services and support, and the subscription plans along the bottom are what we sell from an access subscription perspective. Software, I'll just very briefly touch on that one. The services and support is pretty clear. The big thing, perhaps one thing to call out on the support is we have global support. We've got 4 primary locations globally. We can do 24/7, follow the sun, 365 day. a year support. But on the software side, obviously the crown jewels for us is the Postgres database. It's the community edition. That's where everything starts. That's our kind of bread and butter. We're heavily involved in continuing to develop the Postgres core database. We do also have an additional database offering, which is something we call EDB Postgres Advanced Server. That's where we take the core Postgres community offering and we add on some additional features that haven't yet made their way into the community edition. So particularly things like in the security space, direct LDAP integration. We know we don't have that in Postgres yet. Things like redaction for PCI data. And another capability that may be of interest to folks is our Oracle compatibility layer. So there's lots of really good tools for anyone that's moving from Oracle to Postgres. There's lots of really good open source tools out there, and there's lots of vendors out there who can help you with that migration, but it's still an effort. What we've got is an Oracle compatibility layer that means that, and I'm gonna kind of oversimplify this, but it means effectively that your PL SQL that you've got in your Oracle database will largely run out of the box in our EPAS offering. So your effort to do that migration, your effort to transcode all of that is much reduced. It basically minimizes the effort on your application teams. So that may be of interest to some folks. The other thing that I think is important from an EDB portfolio perspective is we offer a whole bunch of tools that kind of augment some of the well-known and well-loved open source tools you've got to manage your database. And I think this is really important if you're looking at true enterprise scale. Again, back to your reliability, to your performance, to your scalability, to your security. You need solid backup and recovery options. You need good monitoring tools. We've got something called PEM, which is basically our equivalent of Oracle Enterprise Manager. From a migration perspective, as we mentioned, we have our version of a migration portal, which is kind of like Ora2PG on steroids, and it also does code remediation. From a high availability perspective, this is where I think we've got some pretty good offerings. Typically, if you're looking for 4 nines availability, so 4 nines being the typical scenario where you've got a primary and a couple of read-only replicas, and there is a period of failover. Typically, it's less than a minute where you've got like a leader switch or something like that. That's where we have EFM, Enterprise Failover Manager, as our solution there. If you need zero downtime, if you need a multi-master solution, that's where we would look at our BDR option. So I'll leave this slide for now, but just so you know, you can have a browse of this once we send it out, and obviously come back if there's additional questions. But I think one of the things is we've got the SMEs to support you along the journey, and we've got some tools that can also really help get you to enterprise grade. I won't go through this very colorful slide, but just so you can see, this is just an example. We'll put this in the deck so you can have a look at it. Just along the left-hand side, you'll see those categories that I referred to earlier in terms of service requests, database provisioning, all the way through to patching and upgrades. This will just give you a sample of how we might solve that problem, both in private and public cloud for a customer. And what I've tried to do there is just annotate that so you can see how that maps to enablement of some of those enterprise requirements that we talked about earlier. So just to kind of wrap things up and hopefully leave a little bit of time for Q&A, I think that what we're seeing fundamentally is enormous growth in use of open source software over the last few years. We're definitely seeing that no longer are the financial services companies kind of keeping open source or Postgres at arm's length. Postgres is absolutely kind of leading the charge as far as we're concerned. But, and this is a big but, there's a pretty high bar to entry to really run enterprise grade applications, high criticality applications, mission critical apps in financial services. So our strong recommendation is find a partner, find someone who's got the expertise to help you on that journey. Who's got the expertise to kind of help develop the product. So we have, honestly, and again, I'm a little biased on this, we've got, I think, genuinely some expertise you won't find elsewhere. We've got folks who literally have been involved with the Postgres database since its inception. We have a bunch of folks that are committing on a regular basis. I think we've got about 300 odd engineers directly working on Postgres development. We've got a number of committers. We've got folks on the Postgres committee itself. The other thing I think we've got is we're really about this holistic database solution. We're not about just kind of throwing some Postgres binaries over the fence and letting our customers figure it out. We know we're there we want to further the Postgres journey. We want to be successful, which is why we look at your front to back solution. We want to help enable that as a service offering for your developers, give you flexibility in how you deploy, and just help you get to the right place. We've got the SMEs, I think, some of the tooling we saw on the previous slide. The flexibility in deployment, I think, is an interesting and important piece. As I say, we can do various flavors of on-premise, and also we have some public cloud offerings. And honestly, one of the big things for us, one of the really, really most important things for us is our EDB support of the community. We are huge Postgres fans, fanatics, you could say. Our goal in life is to develop Postgres, to continue Postgres on its journey to be the go-to and the mainstream database of choice. As I say, we actively help the development of the product. Sometimes we take our customers' requirements and help to drive those into the Postgres releases. I think we had something like over 40 contributors to Postgres 14. Outside of just technical development of the Postgres database, we have a lot of folks in the community a lot of my peers in my team who are running Postgres community groups. We like to do a lot of education. We want to share the word about Postgres. We like to do sessions like this. We sometimes sponsor conferences to help kind of educate people. For us, Postgres' success is our success. So we really want to help you guys kind of accelerate that journey and get Postgres to where we think it deserves to be. So let me pause there. And it's been a pleasure to kind of walk through some of the slides. I appreciate we've covered a lot. Let's try and do some questions right now. If folks think of questions after the fact, I'm sure we can try and capture some of those afterwards. And then also, as Crystal mentioned earlier, we'll send out the materials for folks that want to have a look in a bit more depth. But let me pause for now, and I'll hand back to Crystal.
Excellent. Thanks, Julian. There was so much really, really good information here. We do have a couple of questions here in the chat that we'll take before we leave. As Julian said, if you do have any questions, now would be the time to get those answered live while we have him here. But let's start, Julian, with, is there any tool other than WebTool that we can use to migrate from Oracle to Postgres?
Yeah, so we have a migration portal, which is a web-based offering. We also have the opportunity to deploy that on a customer's premise. And yeah, and I understand, I think, where that question is coming from. Sometimes with financial services companies, your CISOs typically don't like if we're exporting DDLs from databases and sending them to out of the enterprise. So yeah, so we've got the opportunity to run that on occasion on-premise as well.
Excellent. Okay. Are there any data modeling tooling that EDB offers?
We do not, to the best of my knowledge, and I'll stand corrected and we'll send that out if that's not the case, but I'm not aware that we have anything from a tools perspective. We certainly have a lot of SMEs that would be able to assist there, but I'm not aware of any tooling that we have in our portfolio there.
Excellent. Okay. Let's see. The next question's asking community edition of Postgres versus EDB Postgres. How does the community edition fare in performance compared to EDB? Understand that the additional features you have provide like security and Oracle compatibility, etc.
Yeah, so the core, the absolute foundation of that EPAS, the EDB Postgres Advanced Server, is the community edition. So I'll need to check if we've done benchmarks between the two. I know exactly who to ask, and we'll make sure we get that out to you. But it's basically the same core product as the person mentioned. Yeah, we add some stuff on top of that, which is kind of things that just haven't made it into the core product yet. And I think that's the differentiator with that product. We honestly, we want to push stuff into the community product. That's not always possible. So that's where we give folks that opportunity just to augment the Postgres, the community edition Postgres. In my background, just as an FYI, I came from a place where we wanted to get off a legacy database and we wanted to go to Postgres. And I had a very kind of puritanical view that I wanted to go to pure ANSI SQL. I wanted to get to Community Edition. And long story short, it's a lot of effort to get there. And I had a fairly impending timeline to do that, a very tight timeline in which to do it. So we ultimately came to the decision that EPAS, EDB, Postgres Advanced Server, was a good stepping stone for us to get to our objectives, which was to remove the incumbent vendor, but to go part way to getting to Postgres. So that's often, how we see it deployed in enterprises where folks kind of treat it as a stepping stone to get them to break that bond with your legacy database provider and get you part way to where you want to be at much less effort. As I say, the compatibility layer, particularly from an Oracle perspective, significantly reduces the effort in migration. It's by no means an exact science, but we see somewhere in the region of a kind of 70 to 80% reduction in effort in migration. It will vary hugely from database to database, but it's a significant resource aid in migration.
Great. And actually, Stacy just sent us a note that says PG admin, which EDB contributes back to the community, can do ERD as well.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we have one more question here, and it says, does EDB publish bug fixes / vulnerability fixes? If so, where is that located on the site? And we can answer the second part of that question depending on your answer, Julian.
So the short answer is the short answer is yes, and we'll send that out with the follow-up. So we'll tell you where exactly you can get your hands on those.
Perfect. Okay, well, it looks like that's all the questions we have today. So thank you so much to everybody who joined us today. Again, as we mentioned, the recording and the slides, along with some additional assets and links, will be sent out to you at the close of this broadcast. Excuse me. So please keep an eye out on your email. And as always, if you have any additional questions for our team, please feel free to reach out. So thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Julian. First question is the audience asked about is there any limitation in Postgres when they use the enterprise or at home or any version?
So I think the question was, are there any limitations with Postgres or with Enterprise Edition? I think that's quite a big question. I think the way I would answer that is that Postgres has grown hugely. Postgres is quite an old database. It's been around for 25 plus years. Over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, it has matured hugely. So it is very, very much on a par with many of its peer databases. So if you take like an Oracle or a SQL, it's very, very similar from a functionality perspective. I think, as we talked earlier, EPAS has some extensions to core community Postgres, specifically from the Oracle compatibility perspective, but also from some additional security features, which I think I mentioned earlier. So Postgres is a very, very, very strong database these days. That's why we see so many people wanting to use Postgres in their enterprises.
刚刚大概讲了一下那个社群版跟那个 EPAS 版的一个差别，啊 ，EPAS 版那个功能会比那个开源版的功能多很多，不过好像没有提到限制。Julian, is there any limitation in the like storage space for community version or enterprise version?
Good question. Yeah, very good question. So technically there is no limit in the storage that can be associated with a Postgres database. I think what you will see is in public cloud offerings, some of the public cloud vendors, so for example, Microsoft, AWS, and our own public cloud offering, there are some limitations in the sizes. They're typically around, I think we're up to about 32 terabytes in Microsoft Azure, and Azure single server, I think, is about 16 terabytes. But on-premise and for anyone implementing Postgres on their own, there's no limitation.
刚讲是说，基本上是没有什么限制。不过以现在现行的应用上面的话，云端的用户大概32 T， 然后地端那个客户大概16 T 左右，这跟我们现在跟在台湾的客户的经验差不多。 Julian, how can EDB secure our data?
Secure our data. Yeah, really important question, particularly in financial services. Yeah, so I think that's one of the key things where EPAS, our EDB Postgres Advanced Server offering, has some advantages over the community Postgres. So we add some additional features in there specifically around redaction of data. For both EPAS and Community Edition, both of those versions of data, their data can be encrypted at rest just through standard storage encryption. We don't offer a TDE offering. There is no TDE offering with Community Postgres, and there is currently, as of today, there is no offering with Postgres Advanced Server. However, drumroll, there will be as of Postgres 15, and in Q1 next year, there will be a release of EPAS where we will support transparent data encryption, which means encryption of data at rest. So I think EPAS with the combination of TDE early next year, plus some of the additional redaction features that we've got, plus additional auditing features that we build into Postgres, that helps particularly financial services customers protect their data.
OK， 刚 Julian 说，目前这个 EDB 的这个刚说的 EPAS 版本的话，会提供更多这种加密型的那个功能，包含它提到明年会那个推出一个新版本，大概15版左右，会有一些 TDE 加密，然后还有一些集合功能，还有一个身为那个transparent 的那个就是透明性的加密这个部分。那之后推出的话，我们会像在这样都有介绍。
Okay, just a simple question. Is there any backup restore plan for Postgres or EPAS system with a very big data amount?
Yeah, I think if I understood the question clearly, it was, are there backup and restore utilities for EPAS? Is that the correct question?
Yes.
Yes. So yeah, so we support Barman primarily. That's a Postgres extension and a utility that basically Postgres or that EDB. It's an open source utility, but it's one that EDB, where we run the project, we drive the project, and that is our primary tool for both backup and restore, obviously, and that applies both to Community Edition Postgres and also to Postgres Advanced Server.
刚讲是提到说有一个，对不起，刚讲是说讲是说对于这个资料量很大的 Postgres 和 EPAS 的资料库方案有个方案叫 Barman BL。那之后各位如果对这个方案有兴趣的话，我们可以为各位再另外解释。Julian, one of the question is that how do we secure our data on the EDB cloud?
On the EDB cloud, yeah, good question. So the EDB cloud, first of all, is typically what we refer to as Big Animal. That is our public cloud offering. So there's two primary things about securing the data. First of all, we enforce SSL for all data in transit. So any client connection to the database is forced over SSL, so encrypted. Secondly, we by default encrypt the data at rest with our cloud service providers. And that is, as of today, we do that just with the kind of standard keys from the cloud service providers. In the not too distant future, I believe it's Q1 next year, we should be looking at doing that with customer managed keys. So the customer has even more control over the encryption keys that secure the data. And then finally, the last thing is all of the Postgres instances that we run in our public cloud offering actually run inside the customer's account. So the customer controls our access into their account. So 3 real levels, like I say, data in transit encryption, data at rest encryption, and the fact that all of the data resides within the customer's account, whether that's an Azure subscription or a AWS account.
刚刚讲是说，在云端的话，大概有3层的保护。第一层是用 SSL 去做保护，第二个说是用那个类像 key 这种方式去保护。那目前还是用那个标准的 key。那明年的版本的话，会有那个 客户自己拥有的客制化的 team 来保护资料会加密。那第三的话，他是说目前只要云端的话，云端的那个 service provider 像AWS，他们自己本身会从保密措施，所以目前的保密的这个方式大概是3层这样。Julian, is there any function in EDB can query the creation time specific table?
Query the creation time of a table? Yes, almost certainly. I do not know off the top of my head, but I'm quite sure that's something that just through standard SQL commands would be possible.
Okay. 这个部分的话，应该是技术问题。那各位如果之后使用者如果这方面有机会的话，可以提供给欧立威的话，我们可以向各位解答。Okay, next question is, do you have any case can be shared about migrate system mainframe to EDB?
So migrating a database to EDB, was that the question?
Migrate a mainframe DB.
Mainframe DB. Okay, gotcha. So I guess that would be coming probably from a DB2 or something like that. So EDB does not have any tooling per se to support DB2 to Postgres migrations. We do have some partners that we work with to help us with migrations from non-Oracle databases. Oracle is our primary database where we have some very specific tooling to help with the migrations. But if you have an interest, by all means, please reach out to your local rep, and I'm sure we have partners that would be only too happy to help there.
刚刚有年前也可以做，因为 EDB 像 EPAS 这样的，这样资料库的话，它的那个主要的面对的是 Oracle 资料库的移转，会比较有优势这样子。如果说像 mainframe 的问题的话，各位可以找欧立威这边讨论一下一些移转的策略。
Unicode 对制造区段的资源程度，
那有关制造这个问题的话，因为欧立威这边有一些那个经验，那之后如果有这个需求的话，可以找我们联络我们的业务，